Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. Malek Thompson was not a criminal. He had never had any trouble with the law, not even for a traffic ticket. His criminal record was clean, as was his conscience. He paid his taxes, attended neighborhood meetings, and tried to be a good neighbor, a good father, an honest man. 33 years old, he worked as a civil engineer for a well-known construction company. A graduate of Georgia Tech, he had built a stable career through the sweat of his brow. He was not a man of conflict. He preferred logic, construction, straight lines, and solid foundations, both in his profession and in his personal life. He lived with his 5-year-old son, Elijah, in a small craftsman-style house in Birmingham, Alabama, in a quiet neighborhood lined with trees and the sound of children's laughter. Their yard was modest but well kept. Malek had built a small wooden playhouse with his own hands, complete with a telescope on the roof and a shelf full of children's books, where Elijah often came to dream silently. Sunday afternoons were sacred. It was when Malek would pull out his Lego Technic boxes or foam core boards to build models of bridges and skyscrapers with his son. Sometimes, he let Elijah choose the names for the structures: Lightning Bridge, Tower of the Stars, Dragon's Gateway. These moments were their refuge, their world together. Malek also loved chess. He had learned to play as a child from his grandfather, a former schoolteacher. He saw it as a way to structure his thinking, to see the pitfalls ahead of time, an art he tried to instill in his son, gently, without ever forcing it. Since the sudden death of his wife, Angela, 2 years earlier, a ruptured aneurysm in his sleep, Malek had been raising Elijah alone. The loss had devastated him, but he had held on for his son. He had never considered starting over. He often said, "I don't need two of me. He just needs me to be there, fully." His gentleness with Elijah surprised even the mothers at school. He prepared snacks, styled the boy's hair, and sewed patches onto bags. One day, a teacher told him, "You have the patience of a mother." He smiled without answering. But one Tuesday morning, all that came crashing down. He was returning from a construction site about 30 minutes from the city center. Still in his work clothes, his hard hat on the passenger seat, he decided to stop at a local convenience store. He just wanted to get some fresh orange juice and a granola bar. It was hot, he'd skipped breakfast, and he planned to be home in time to pick Elijah up from school. He entered the small shop. There were few people there, just a teenager by the refrigerators and an elderly gentleman at the counter. He greeted politely, took what he needed, paid in cash, and left. 3 hours later, as the afternoon sun struggled to penetrate the curtains of his living room, 2 policemen knocked on Malek's door. He had barely placed his hard hat on the hall table. Elijah was napping in his room, a blanket pulled up to his chin, holding his blue blanket against him. Malek hesitated before opening the door, wiping his concrete dust-stained hands on his pants. "Mr. Malek Thompson?" "Yes, it's me." "You are under arrest for shoplifting." A hollowness formed in his chest. The police uniforms suddenly seemed too neat, too rigid, almost unreal. Malek blinked, as if he had misheard. "Excuse me? There must be some mistake." But the faces opposite him were closed, professional, without compassion or question. One of them read him his rights. The other was already approaching with the handcuffs. "You can remain silent. Anything you say may be used against you." "Wait. What did I steal?" "I came back from a construction site. I just bought some juice and an energy bar." The convenience store manager, a certain Donald Riley, accuses you of stealing a bottle of alcohol and a bar of chocolate. The words hung in the air like a toxic mist. Malek tried to remember, to piece together. No, he'd only taken what he needed. He'd placed both items on the counter. He'd paid in cash. The clerk had nodded, there hadn't been a problem. No noise. No tension. But he hadn't taken a receipt. He hadn't asked for one. He was in a hurry to get home, already thinking about the laundry to hang out, the dinner to prepare. He wanted to protest, but the policeman's hands were already on his wrists. The metallic click of the handcuffs echoed through the corridor. "Wait, my son. My son is sleeping inside. There's no one else in my house." The officers exchanged a look. After some hesitation, one of them called Child Protective Services, while Malik helplessly begged to be notified of his neighbor, Madison, who had babysat Elijah several times before. They allowed him to shout a few words to her from the back of the car. "Madison. Elijah's asleep. Can you take care of him?" I'll fix this, I promise." He then found himself in the back of a police car, under the indifferent gaze of a few neighbors who were taking out their trash or walking their dogs. The next few hours were a blur. His photograph was taken. His fingerprints were taken. He answered absurd questions. "Have you ever flown in your life? Were you under the influence of alcohol that day? Why did you run away from the store?" "I didn't run away. I just paid and left." But who was really listening to him? He was denied an immediate phone call. He was served a cold meal tray that he didn't touch. He spent the night sitting on a thin mattress in a freezing cell, his heart breaking at the thought of Elijah waking up without understanding, alone, without his father. The next morning, his rights magically reappeared. He demanded to call Rachel Evans, his college friend, now a successful civil rights lawyer. When she picked up, he felt his own breath shorten. "Rachel. It's Malik. I'm at the station. They've arrested me. For theft." "What? Are you kidding?" I don't understand anything, Rachel." "It's Donald Riley, the manager of the convenience store." He told her everything, in disarray, panic rising in waves. She listened in silence, then replied in a firm, calm voice. "Malik, breathe. I'll come right away. They have nothing against you, and I'll make sure of it. We're going to take this case down brick by brick." When the case came before the Jefferson County Court, Malik naively believed the worst was behind him. After all, the surveillance footage would prove his innocence. Rachel had prepared a solid case, and he had nothing to reproach himself for. He expected to face a lengthy, but fair, process. But he quickly understood that this trial would not be decided solely on the facts. The real fight would not be against the evidence, but against the looks. The judge assigned to the case, Harold Whitmore, was a prominent figure in the local courthouse. 68 years old, his suit always impeccably pressed, his hands clasped behind his back as he entered the courtroom. He had presided over hundreds of hearings. It was said that he knew the law inside and out. But behind this reputation lurked another, far less glorious truth. He belonged to what some still called the Old South, the generation for whom racism was no longer spoken aloud, but which persisted in sighs, heavy silences, and hasty judgments. He was not a man of shouting or visible violence, but his decisions, his body language, and his tone betrayed an old, entrenched system, resistant to change. He had grown up in an Alabama where segregation wasn't a memory, but a rule. And though the Constitution had evolved, there were days when Whitmore seemed to have never truly mourned it. From the outset of the hearing, the atmosphere was heavy. The silence in the room was not one of respect, but of fear. The audience benches were filled with curious onlookers, neighbors, a few journalists, and even members of the local Civil Rights Association, alerted by Rachel Evans. Whitmore entered the room, walked slowly to his seat, and settled down with a sigh, as if the matter before him were but one more inconvenience in a long day. When he laid eyes on Rachel, his annoyance was immediate. "Master Evans, I would ask you to be brief. We have a pile of more urgent matters to attend to." Rachel answered calmly, but her jaw was tense. "Your Honor, this is a case of wrongful arrest based on an unproven accusation. I must defend my client fully, as the law allows." He didn't answer. He just gave a look that said, "That tone won't work here." As for Malik, every time he spoke, the judge stared at him like a teacher dissatisfied with an unruly student. His gaze was anything but neutral. It carried a weight, a suspicion, a preconceived notion. And then, after yet another rude interruption, the sentence fell. You people in your community always have an excuse. You have to answer for your actions at some point. A cold shudder ran through the audience. Rachel jumped like a spring. Her face froze, but her eyes flashed. Objection, Your Honor. This statement is clearly discriminatory, racist, and in violation of judicial ethics. The judge grabbed his gavel and banged violently, as if to remind everyone that this room belonged to him. Objection overruled. This court has wasted enough time with these antics. There were murmurs in the room. Heads turned, eyebrows raised. Journalists scribbled frantically. But Malik didn't move. He felt his heart pound, his hands tighten on the armrests, but he kept his head high. He knew that in this courtroom, every word, every breath could be turned against him. His anger, justified, could cost him his freedom. Then, in a calm, almost gentle voice, he replied. I'm here to prove that I didn't steal anything. And whether you believe me or not won't change the truth. This simple but powerful sentence fell into a heavy silence. It was not a defense, but an affirmation. Not a plea, but a conviction. And for the first time since the hearing began, Judge Whitmore briefly looked down at his papers, as if searching for an escape route. But Malik knew there wouldn't be any. Not this time. For weeks, Rachel Evans was fighting to obtain a crucial piece, the surveillance video of the supermarket where the incident had allegedly taken place. From the first day, she had made a formal request to the manager, Donald Riley. He had replied laconically. The cameras weren't working that day. The tapes were overwritten. But Rachel wasn't one to take no for an answer. She knew those answers all too well, ambiguous, convenient, and often deceptive. She filed a formal motion with the court to compel the release of the footage. Riley stalled, citing computer crashes, hard drive failures, and even an archiving error. Rachel didn't give up. She contacted the security system provider, interviewed the employee who had witnessed the incident, and discovered that the recordings were automatically saved for 30 days, and had not been deleted, as Riley had claimed. Finally, 2 days before the hearing, a judge ordered the convenience store to hand over a full copy of the footage. It received the file that same evening, on a sealed USB drive delivered by a bailiff. Rachel spent most of the night watching the sequence, alone in her office. At first, she didn't see anything special. Malik came in, got his juice and bar, paid, and left. She rewinded it several times, as if to make sure she hadn't missed anything. Then, 27 seconds after Malik left, she saw him, Donald Riley, hunched over the counter, muttering something in a young employee's ear. She turned on the AI-generated subtitles and read the words. And then his stomach tightened. The next morning, in the packed courtroom, she rose with rare solemnity. She approached the central lectern, connected the USB drive to the display system, and said simply, Your Honor, with your permission, the defense wishes to present a decisive visual element. Judge Whitmore raised an eyebrow, visibly annoyed at wasting more time, but nodded wordlessly. The giant screen, mounted on the wall behind the jury's bench, lit up with a faint crackle. The entire room held its breath. The video began. In it, Malik calmly walked into the convenience store. He was still wearing his hard hat. He walked over to an aisle, picked out an orange juice and an energy bar. He walked over to the register, put down the items, took out cash, waited, and then collected his change. He said something, you could tell it was a thank you, and then left. No suspicious gestures. No hesitation. No trace of theft. The room was silent. Even the judge stared at the screen, motionless. But Rachel didn't turn off the video. She let it run. It was then that Donald Riley was seen coming out of the back room, leaning towards his colleague, and saying in a clearly audible voice, reinforced by the microphone at the register. That guy. I'm sure he stole something. You look at those people too kindly, they'll loot your store. There was no ambiguity. No misinterpretation. It was a naked, brutal prejudice, filmed, recorded, exposed to all. Riley then took out his phone, looked out the window, and called the police. Calmly. Without panicking. Without even checking his inventory. The video stopped. A deathly silence fell over the room. You could have heard a needle drop. Rachel turned slowly to Judge Whitmore. She didn't need to raise her voice. Every word resonated with the weight of evidence. Your Honor, as you have just noted, my client left the store after paying for his items. No theft occurred. And what is even more serious is that the theft charge is based solely on racial perception and not on fact. She paused, then continued, more firmly. The defense requests the immediate dismissal of the charges against Mr. Malik Thompson and the initiation of an investigation against the complainant, Mr. Donald Riley, for making a false statement motivated by manifest racial bias. She fell silent. She didn't back down. Her gaze met the judge's. His eyes shone with cold, controlled anger and unwavering determination. The judge Harold Whitmore raised immobile for a few seconds. His face, initially red with annoyance, gradually turned ash-gray. It was as if his confidence had been drained. His fingers tapped nervously on the surface of the desk. He avoided Rachel's gaze, Malik's, and the audience's. The entire room held its breath, frozen in a world-ending silence. Then, in a tense, almost strangled voice, he said. The court suspends the hearing for 5 minutes. He rapped the gavel once, half-heartedly, stood up abruptly, and left the room, accompanied by a security guard. His step, usually stiff and sure, seemed uncertain, almost shaky. During her absence, murmurs erupted. Eyes met. Several members of the audience, shocked by the video, exchanged whispers. A journalist, visibly upset, wrote frantically in her notebook. Rachel, for her part, remained standing, straight as an arrow, her face fixed, holding the gaze of anyone who tried to escape it. As for Malik, he didn't speak. He looked at his hands resting on his knees. Clean, calloused, honest hands. He thought of Elijah. Of what he would tell him tonight. Of that simple truth he wanted to preserve for his son: the world is unfair, but you must remain dignified. 5 minutes later, which seemed like 50, Judge Whitmore returned. But this time he wasn't alone. Behind him walked a federal marshal, in full uniform. His presence added new tension to the room. It was still unclear why he was there, but his silent authority filled the room. Whitmore returned to his seat. He took a deep breath, sat down slowly, then carefully adjusted his glasses. He suddenly looked older, as if the years he wore had fallen away from him all at once. Then, in a deep but softer voice, almost resigned, he declared. After viewing the video content presented by the defense, and in the absence of any evidence contradicting the visible facts, the court recognizes that the charges brought against Mr. Malik Thompson are unfounded. They are therefore abandoned with immediate effect. A breath of relief went through the room. A woman in the audience let out a, "Thank you, Lord," suffocated. But the judge didn't stop there. He paused, as if to weigh each word. Then he continued, his gaze now fixed on his notes, his voice more assured. Furthermore, on the basis of the evidence presented, in particular the remarks made by the complainant to his employee, filmed by internal cameras, the court issues an immediate arrest warrant against Mr. Donald Riley, for false testimony, slanderous denunciation, and incitement to racial hatred. A murmur of astonishment rippled through the room. Some spectators exchanged stunned glances, others nodded silently. The marshal behind the judge didn't move, but his role was now clear: the warrant would be executed immediately. But what was most surprising was not the legal reversal. This is what Judge Whitmore did next. He slowly took off his glasses, carefully placed them on the table, and looked up at Malik. For a moment, his features lost their rigidity. His tone was no longer that of a magistrate above all else, but of a man confronting his own moral bankruptcy. "Mr. Thompson," he began, his voice lower. "I apologize. For my words. For the tone I used toward you. They were inappropriate, unworthy not only of my position, but of what justice should embody. The room was now as silent as a church. He took a deep breath, his gaze still locked on Malik's. A disciplinary investigation on my conduct will be launched in the coming days, and I will welcome it without reservation. As for my own decision on the future of my function in this court, I announce it to you here. I have requested an interview with the disciplinary council. I stand ready to hand in my robes, if that is the price to pay. Some in the room bowed their heads in shock, others were moved. Rachel remained straight, but her eyes shone. Malik, however, didn't answer right away. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if to absorb each word. Then he nodded slowly. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't forgetting. It was an acknowledgement of what had just happened, a man of power, forced to face himself. The case quickly made headlines in local newspapers. What started as a routine hearing for a petty theft charge became, within hours, a media event and then a national alarm bell. A video discreetly filmed from the last bench of the court by a young activist present in the room, Jasmine Boyd, a law student and member of an African American collective, was published that same evening on social networks. It showed the exact moment when Judge Whitmore apologized, and then, even more strikingly, the moment when he announced that he was questioning his own legitimacy. In less than 24 hours, the video had been shared more than 500,000 times. The comments poured in. This is why we need lawyers like Rachel Evans. Malik is the very definition of dignity. A white judge publicly admitting his wrongdoing? That's historic. Reporters from CNN, NPR, and even the BBC requested interviews. Malik initially refused. He hadn't sought the spotlight. He just wanted the truth. But when he saw that his story was useful to others, that it was reawakening debates, that it was inspiring young black people to defend themselves and to still believe in justice, he agreed to testify, in his own way, calm, collected, without rancor but with clarity. Donald Riley, meanwhile, was arrested within days of the court's ruling. He was charged with perjury, false accusation, and incitement to racial hatred. During the trial, he attempted to downplay his remarks, citing stress, misinterpretation, and other empty excuses. But the images were clear. He was fined $35,000 and ordered to perform 280 hours of community service at a community outreach organization, ironically, located in an African American neighborhood. He was also ordered to attend mandatory seminars on racial bias. His once well-frequented store was boycotted. Within weeks, the shelves were empty. No one had called for a boycott, it had been organized naturally. Residents of all backgrounds decided they no longer wanted to buy their bread, milk, or newspapers in a place where hatred had been normalized. 2 months later, the window was covered with glued newspapers and graffiti. The truth does not expire. Racism will no longer be our daily life. And the shop closed for good. As for Judge Harold Whitmore, he announced his resignation 3 weeks after the hearing. His withdrawal was published in an open letter addressed to the community and relayed in several newspapers. I believed that years of judging had taught me to be fair. I thought that experience was enough to guarantee fairness. But I discovered, with pain, that even experience can be blind, if it is not guided by listening and humility. He ended his letter with a sentence that made an impression. That day, I didn't judge Malik Thompson. He judged me, silently, righteously. And he was right. Malik, however, returned to his life. Not without scars. Not as if nothing had happened. But with a deep peace, a newfound anchor in what he knew was right. He found Elijah, made him pancakes, took him to the park, returned to his engineering job. He refused to let this ordeal define who he was, but he accepted that it was now part of his story. He also resumed Sunday crafts with his son, except this time, Elijah asked him to build miniature courthouses, or justice buildings. Malik just smiled. But most importantly, he began to share his experience. Invited to high schools, libraries, and civic forums, he spoke about justice, civil rights, and what it means to remain dignified in the face of adversity. He didn't point fingers, he didn't preach. He told stories. And that was enough. One evening, as they were returning from a lecture at a high school in Birmingham, Elijah, sitting in the back seat of the car, broke the silence. "Dad, is it true that a judge insulted you?" Malik hesitated, then replied calmly. "Yes, it's true." "And, he apologized?" "Yes. In front of everyone." "Have you forgiven him?" Malik stared at the road for a moment, the headlights illuminating the white stripes of asphalt. Then he answered. "Yes. Because I don't want to be like those who judge me without knowing me." Elijah smiled softly and returned to his book. And Malik, looking at him in the rearview mirror, said to himself that the real victory was not the dropping of the charges. It was to teach his son that integrity is stronger than injustice.